Okay, let's have a look at change. Now, change, being one of the characteristics of projects, has quite a numerous set of definitions about it and impacts. Because remember, thinking about projects are doing, projects are delivering change to a part of or a whole organization, or one section of it, or somebody else's organization for that matter, right? But it's also subject to change within it. Now, that's where it becomes a little interesting. Being one of the characteristics of projects, they're about change, and yet for some peculiar reason, it's considered projects very difficult to make changes while we're going through it. This is because quite often we have this attitude that I'm going to get all the spec up front, and that's what I'm going to build to. Now, 30, 20, even 20 years ago, this might have been a sort of a reasonable way of thinking. But, you know, life is changing at a rapid rate of knots. It always has done, but it seems to be accelerating. And nowadays, we need to be much more aware that change can happen overnight and be able to respond to that change. And this becomes very critical when it comes to projects and making sure that the scope and the solution that we deliver is still the right current solution that the business wants by the time we get to the end of the project. What does that mean? It means that, of course, if their view of the solution needs to change, we need to be able to respond to that and build it and change that spec of the solution as we go through the project. This is why we use one of the very key techniques called iterative development, right? So one way we can help this is using iterative development, and that we look at in more detail in another session. But really what we're saying is we're going to build a bit at a time and get the business to check with us, build the solution in parts as we go through, so that if things do need to change, we can always go back and fix them up if it has an impact on what we've already delivered. Waiting until the end of the project and showing them or delivering the solution at that point, or getting the business involved at that point, is too late. So a lot of the times we have to shift our way of thinking. And a lot of this stuff's up in the head. It's a mindset. We have to shift the way we think and how we run projects. We don't get all the design up front. We don't get everything written down and locked in by that point. Some cases you may have to, like compliance or legislative change. But even then, you know, if you're trying to make a change over 6 months in legislative change can happen overnight. Sometimes that legislation might go out of the window, might be completely overwritten halfway through the project for whatever reason. Right? So we've got to be able to respond to it, right? And therefore, they're set up a mechanism how to do that. But a couple of things we need to consider. When we're building stuff, we still need to record its version as we go along, so we can see what we've made changes to. Some of this is called baselining. It's putting down an understanding of a particular product, document, piece of hardware we're building or a solution we're building, you know, and therefore, if changes are made to it, we can see what changes we made to it in case we need to backtrack, or we need to understand what the impact is of anything we do in the future. So linked to change, first of all, is something called configuration management. So we have configuration management in place at some point, right? This not only looks at the solution, right? Looks for the controlling the solution we're building, but also controlling any project related information. Right? Like documents, for instance, particular business case. If the business case changes in little pieces, then that's fine, but we still need to track the version. Like this is the version we baseline at the end of the design phase before we start running the project, version 1. Any minor changes to it, we put version 1.1, 1.2. Just like your operating system on every application you have on your computer system. Right? The amount of updates that come in or security checks that come out, it becomes a slight version of the original baseline. Now, if they release a new version, then we have something different. So now we go from version 1 to version 2, right? Like, you know, we all know Windows going from version 7 to version 8 to version 10 and so on and so forth, wherever you haven't just started, right? I started in version 2, so even before that actually, but there you go. So you've got to track that way through. So we need to have some sort of mechanism in place to do that, but it can't be onerous where it restricts the way the guys are working in the build. Now, there are a lot of good applications out there these days that help you track this sort of information as you go through the particular build part, doing the tasks and the builds within, you know, the very small time frames, time boxes, work packages, or whatever mechanism you're using, right? The only difference between them really is that I'm locking in a time frame in the time box. You've only got that amount of time to do the work. The work package gives an impression it's slightly flexible, right? Because that might have to be depending on what you're building. But at the end of the day, work package is still a time box. If you say you've got 3 weeks and that's it, right? But we control it differently. In other words, through scope, as you know. This we talk about in other sessions. So configuration management, which means, you go through some simple steps here. I need to plan what type of configuration I need to have in place, and that depends on the type of solution, how critical the control needs to be, from that point of view. So we need to plan how we're going to manage it. Then we need to put some sort of identification in place. Identification in place, right? That means it's got to have, for instance, unique identifiers for each particular solution, each particular document the business case will have. And how am I going to keep that updated so I know that from one version it's 1.1, 1.2, and then up to version 2 and so forth, right? Letters, numbers, whatever it happens to be. So you need to have some identification in place. And then once you've got that, very importantly, you now need to control that change, right? So you need to have mechanisms in place to control and protect your products, right, from unnecessary and unauthorized change. So you're going to say who's going to have access to changing those documents or changing that specification to the where this stuff's recorded, who can sign off that particular change to make sure it's authorized. So if you have a change to your plan because you've added some time frames to it because you've added a scope, as long as that's been authorized, and agreed, that's where the control comes in. Storage of all these particular products you have in place, how I'm going to store my documents so they can also be controlled and managed and reviewed as we go through, right? Then we need to sort of check them as we go. So we have some sort of status reporting, status checking, right? We need to check the status of these products to make sure that they are where they are at any one point in time. So anytime I can go through the project and say, where am I with this particular product? What have I produced so far? How's that fit into the bigger scheme of things? And then after that, make sure that what we have built is what we're supposed to have built and what we have got is what we were supposed to have built. So we go through sort of verification. We're checking that that's what I've built. Does that comply with the original specification we had in place, or the very latest specification that we've recorded through the control for that particular product? Make sure I've got the right business case in place for the business to make a decision. Making sure that if I'm producing a new application document, for instance, that particular application, or that part of it is the right version that I need at this point in time. Because some things may have changed. Updates and changes and reviews all can impact on this, okay? So this is sort of the typical track you'll go through. And it's iterative, but it's also loops. Most of the looping will go through identification, then control for an item. If we add more to the scope, for example, like a new document, then we may need to add that to the identification process in place, right? And then keep the control. So it'll go through here as we go through the project, and as we come towards them, we need to verify to make sure that what we've produced is what's supposed to be, or that's the correct document, or the correct set of plans we're using. Whatever it happens to be, like architects, making sure they're giving the builders the right plans. No point building off the wrong set of plans. It does happen, sadly, but there you go. All right, so that's the first thing, put configuration management in place, okay? And that allows us, therefore, to control change at a sensible level. But it really does mean that overall we need to accept, right, that accept change within a project. Because in order to deliver the correct solution at the end, to deliver the right solution, right, what the business wants, remember the first principle, we need to make sure that whatever it is that we are building fits within their strategic fit, within what the project's supposed to deliver, because understanding what the business really want out of this, the beneficial change, and fits within what they're expecting from an investment point of view. So we have to ensure we deliver the right solution. So we need to be of a mind of changing things. It's all making sure that whatever happens, any change we have is authorized by the right level of authority, right? Authorized with at the right level. Very important, at the right level. Okay, so accept that change is inevitable. Remember, if we add or take scope out, it has an impact on the plan. We've got other contingencies within that, sometimes a bit of budget and adding costs. The time frame always should be controlled at the very, very last minute. Most of the time, we shouldn't really be doing that, because sometimes we're not allowed to do that because we've got a time frame to deliver the project, right? But big help is through scope, because now we understand, having prioritized our scope, that maybe we have contingency in that scope, that we can't deliver that right now. Let me say we never will, but I can take it out because it won't have an impact on the solution. Remember, if you take stuff out of a project, because now it becomes a won't have now, or I'm not going to deliver that in this particular time frame because I can't, it doesn't stop you delivering it later in operations through business as usual. You don't need to run a project to deliver a whole part of could haves, for example, or the lowest level of requirement that's now just a contingency, because it's a depth of feature that will not impact on the solution. Right? So you don't need to control that by going through a project. You can run it through some sort of change like Scrum in operation environments. That's the best thing to do. The business may even turn around and say, don't want it anymore, realize it's not necessary. Remember, it does have to add value, but that value may be so low now that it's not actually important anymore. Or they've changed their minds and said, well, forget about it, we'll leave it out. Right? And that's why it's important, as we go through the project, go through the builds, the iterative development, we need to have the business involved in that, because at the end of the day, it's their project. So at that level, they're able to have their input as to how the solution is looking, or that part of it, at that point in time. Is that what they want? Can we make changes and incorporate that change? Right? But whatever happens, we still need to control and manage it. Okay? Now, just make sure we have something in place to how that's going to work. Don't make it onerous, so that we can allow flexibility within the project to do that, but still track it, because at the end of the day, you've got to hand all that information over to operations. So at the end of the day, the information we have is got to have configuration, right, of any solution needs to go into operations, because any changes they make afterwards, they need to understand what the impact of that is on the solution they've got. They need to know what I've sent them. What version of the document I'll be sending out to people. If I want to make changes, what's the impact? If I put a new piece of hardware in place, like a server, a computer server for the network, and it's got a whole pile of different major applications like mail servers, print servers, and anything else running on it, authentication and stuff. If I change the base operating system on there, what's the impact on all those applications that are running on there? Right. So be very careful. This is why you need to know. But track it, whatever is relevant to the project, and keep an eye on things.